All right, and welcome back, everybody. Again, both online and here at Roosevelt Island. And I'm really excited to continue this morning's conversation with our second panel, focused on what would it take to build a digital locker for New York City residents. And I'm really pleased to be joined by two great people, Mirtha Santana, who's and I'm really sorry about this, Vice President for Programs.
The chief program officer.
Chief program officer, did not mean to downgrade you by any stretch. And somebody who's been super helpful, chief program officer at RiseBoro, which is a phenomenal organization in Brooklyn. And she and her team have been really helpful to us in the research for Rebooting NYC. And Matt Klein, who kind of already got introduced, but Matt Klein
Shout
leads
out to Noel, yeah.
Opportunity NYC, which is a really important city agency. And in fact, I wanted to start out by giving you the opportunity to talk a little bit about Opportunity NYC. You know, with a name like that, you wouldn't assume that your agency was a core technology department within city government. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about it, what it does, how it got started, and
Sure. So first of all, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me and for convening this group and for issuing the report. So important. So it's great to be connected to you and to the work you're doing here. So very quickly, the full name of our office is the Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity. Our mission is to help the city of New York use evidence and innovation to reduce poverty and to advance equity. We were created out of a merger of a couple of units founded by Mayor Bloomberg, one that used evidence to test interventions around poverty, another that used technology to integrate data across agencies. And under Mayor de Blasio, we combined those two functions because we saw the natural connections between using data and technology to make services more holistic, more effective, more coordinated, to determine what works. And also because we think that every agency ought to be using digital technology to deliver its services. So the fact that technology and data and service design is core to our work is something that I think we're going to see extend to other agencies. So we have a 70-person multidisciplinary team. We have an innovation fund to test new things. We have evaluations that we do of broad-scale city programs. We have a team that develops digital products. We have a human service team that really focuses on the user experience. We have a data integration team to help city agencies bring data together. We have a digital product team. We have a statistical analysis team. So we try to integrate all those functions and service to low-income New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm. And one of your most notable products was, of course, Access NYC, right?
So yeah, I mean, we have a couple of different products that are relevant to the discussion today. One is Access NYC, which is a tool that allows somebody to very quickly get a preliminary read on which benefits they might qualify for. So they provide some basic information. We use that to do, again, a preliminary read of different benefits, no matter which agency is managing those benefits, and give back information to the person who's using the tool in a standardized, easily readable way so that they can figure out where to go to determine A, if they're truly eligible, and B, to apply and access those benefits. There's other tools that I think are particularly relevant. One is Worker Connect, which allows staff members in city government, regardless of where they sit, if there's been legal approval, to be able to access information about a client, even if that client's information has been given to a different agency. Again, respecting privacy, respecting confidentiality, but under certain circumstances that's allowed. So it facilitates an ability of the city to work in a more coordinated way with the same families.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Mirtha, your organization does tremendously important work serving exactly the group of New Yorkers that Opportunity NYC is also trying to serve. To start us off, could you share a little bit about RiseBoro and what it does?
Thank you. And the same, thank you for the invitation. So RiseBoro is a community-based organization. We are mostly in Bushwick, Brooklyn. It started in the 70s, responding to what it was a horrific event happening after a blackout in New York City, multiple buildings burning, and as a result of that, neighbors, elected officials basically responded to what was happening at the time. It started as a senior services organization, and today provides services to people in homelessness prevention, which is where my expertise lies. We still provide services to older adults through meal delivery, through older adult centers, and also provide services to young people through youth services after school. And in addition, what also got us started, continue to build and manage affordable housing throughout, now not only in Bushwick, but throughout 4 boroughs, not Staten Island. We have housing. And in effect, we use the products that Matt has described, both Worker Connect and also helping people apply for benefits through Access HRA.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thanks. So let me continue with you. And I'll share. This year that I've spent at Cornell Tech, one of the high points was when you and your team reached out to us because you had heard about this concept from our report about the digital locker, and it's a tremendously high compliment for a researcher in academia to have something resonate that well with people on the front lines, where you're actually doing the work. We're just talking about the work here, and so maybe you could talk a little bit about the digital locker concept and why it resonated with you.
So when I saw the report initially, I said, well, we have to reach out and see how we can learn more. And really, to personalize this a little bit, and I mentioned this when we initially spoke, my mother is 71 years old. She's a widow. She lives in NYCHA, which means that her housing is subsidized. She receives food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and I find myself helping her a lot with things like recertification of her benefits. And when I saw the concept, and after going through trying to apply for food stamps for her through Access HRA, I thought to myself, this is something that is going to benefit someone like my mother. And again, I mention her because this is someone who lives in public housing, doesn't really plan to increase her income. She receives Social Security. So a lot of the information that she inputs year by year, at this point, is literally the same. Mm-hmm. So after speaking with you and speaking with a lot of my staff about the concept of having a place, and I do have to say this disclaimer. I am an advocate for people living in poverty. I am not a technology expert. I use technology, but I don't, kind of like the lingo, the technology lingo, it doesn't compute in my brain. So the way that I see it in my mind is I actually see an actual locker with people's information that will not change to apply for benefits. Birth certificates, Social Security cards. These are things that do not change. And when those who, for example, if you apply for SNAP today through Access HRA, you're able to do it, which is amazing. You're able to do it on your phone. You're able to upload documents. But if you, for example, are no longer eligible for SNAP and you go through a year without receiving benefits and need to reapply, you need to go through the whole thing again, uploading the same documents. And I think that these are kind of like the details of the inconvenience that exist when it comes to people living in poverty, which, as it was mentioned in the last panel, highly appreciate. For the most part, our clients are Black, Latinos, and many of the Latinos that we serve, or almost the majority of the Latinos we serve, are from African descent or from indigenous descent. So we're speaking about extremely marginalized population, and the level of the inconvenience, and they're small, but I do think that technology could resolve them.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And Matt, you know, we mentioned in the report that the basic concept of the digital locker is not something we came up with. It is, in fact, something you and your team are already working on. So maybe you could share with us how that project started, what goes into it, and where it stands.
Definitely. So first, just, you know, the motivation and the rationale. I mean, it's essentially what Mirtha's talking about. The idea is that folks who are eligible and that the system is intending to serve ought to be able to access that service in a way that's dignified, easy, seamless. That'll be a better result for them. It's going to be a more efficient, less costly service for the city. And folks ought not to have to go through undue hurdles to access supports that are intended for them to get. And so I want to say a couple quick things. One is, well, first, so the concept and the current status. It's a public-private partnership. We're partnered with New America Foundation, and they're supported in turn by the Rockefeller Foundation, because we all agreed that this was a worthwhile exploration in terms of how technology could improve the lives of low-income New Yorkers. We've been very intentional about trying to start small and learn from a very small pilot. Couple principles there. One, users really matter. So just building a tech and saying, hey, we solved the problem. You spoke to like moving away from tech solutionism. We need to know, how does this really work for Mirtha's mom and others like her? What's the user interface? How can we learn to fix it after we've deployed it? There are all kinds of workflow issues, so it's not just about having technology, it's how does city staff engage with people who are using that technology. There's privacy concerns, security concerns. So what we've done is built a prototype, but built with scale in mind. So leveraging existing city technologies with underlying legal agreements, with a view towards understanding that we'll try it and we'll change it because it won't be right initially. All that is underway, and so we're going to launch this winter with that prototype, first with folks who are insecure in their housing and seeking permanent housing, because thinking that group in particular is a group that may have difficulty, you know, organizing, keeping documents. But also, let me just put this in context to what already is going on. So one thing is that some of this work is well underway already and has been in place at the city. So you're speaking about Access HRA. I want to give due credit to the folks at HRA. A little confusingly, we have two products, Access NYC, which is like a front door general eligibility, and Access HRA, which is a true tool to help you apply and manage your case of for SNAP and now cash assistance. And I know they've made great strides over the years. They have millions of users, hundreds of thousands of folks who engage with that every month. And they include many aspects of a document locker for HRA. I know they have intentions. If you're not experiencing it, we should really look into it, because I know they really intend for those timeless documents to be accessible to those who are coming back and recertifying. So there's work that's underway already. So one of the things that we think this digital locker has to do is coexist with what is already in place and working well. And one thing that is not in place that we think ought to be is a little bit more individual control. So right now, document sharing and storage really happens on a city agency to city agency basis, and there's a legal analysis about whether documents can be shared or not, which is all very appropriate. But one of the things that would allow documents to be shared is personal consent. And so we don't have a mechanism right now that allows somebody to manage their own personal consent to share documents or for staff to access documents in a time of interaction. Also just don't have a mechanism to push documents that I may have to you or to download documents that the city may have to my personal possession. And those are complex things to do. So it's very easy to say, oh yeah, there ought to be that. Super easy, I can say it all day long. Actually doing it, and we can get into the reasons why, is complex not because of technology, but because of regulations, privacy, security concerns, workflows, federal, state, city relationships, and laws. So, but it's worth doing. And it's worth exploring, but we want to be deliberate, start small, learn from what happens on the ground, and evolve in the context of what already exists.
I want to come back to you in a moment with the question around how do you crack those, right? Because I think one of the opportunities we have with this conversation is to dive deep into one particular concept and really explore how you execute this stuff. Because as you say, and this is one of the luxuries we had in the report, it's very easy to say, oh, you ought to use cameras for this, and you ought to create this thing, and yet, you know, I've been in government. I know, like, none of that is easy. It takes procurement, it takes delivery, it takes, you know, dealing with community boards or whatever. And so I want to come back to explore, like, what you need to do that work. But I actually want to ask you, Mirtha, building on what Matt said, like, privacy and control. You know, sometimes, and we do this every day when we check off, you know, the terms of consent or whatever on the app we downloaded this morning, we trade things away for convenience. How do you and the constituents you serve, how are they thinking about the willingness to trade off? What would feel right to them in terms of having agencies share information about them versus having control, but in exchange they might have greater convenience? How should we be thinking about that? How do they want it?
So I think that going back to Matt, specifically starting with people who are, I'm assuming that you were speaking about people living in shelters when you were, I think that is, that's a good idea. It start with a smaller group of people, and there are we're going to be they're going to be trades to however the city decides to do this. Regardless, technology is moving forward. So for what I've heard from my staff who works directly with clients and from clients themselves is that they should have the choice to be able to do things like download their documents from HRA, be able to share their documents. For example, the program that interfaces the most with public benefits of RiseBoro, it's called Homebase. So Homebase is a citywide homelessness prevention program. And when we have access to Workers Connect, which have, by the way, revolutionized the way that a worker is able to collect information or documentation from a client, have access to information that has been previously uploaded by a different worker. So all of that is great, but there seems to be kind of like the devil is in the details. There seems to still be a little bit of a missing link in terms of the access that the user has to determine what they can and cannot do with the information. So to answer your question more directly, people should have an option as to up to what point do they feel comfortable with the information sharing. Somebody, an older adult, for example, that did not grow up with the technology that we see today might be more suspicious. I spoke with one of the directors yesterday of the program, and she is suspicious of technology. So somebody like that would probably not want to have a city agency share her information with another city agency. But if you speak with a younger group of people who are using technology on a day-to-day, I mean, we use technology for the most ridiculous things right now. They're thinking, why can, if I already apply for this information, for this service, I have already applied for home-based services, why when I go to apply for SNAP in another community-based organization, do I have to submit the same documents that I just submitted? Because maybe that community-based organization doesn't have access to Workers Connect like Homebase has access to Workers Connect. So the user should really be the driver of how much access is provided.
All right, great. And so that's yet one more design criterion for you and your team to deliver is making sure that there's options. So it's another thing. Maybe, but Matt, we talk about the need for the users, as Mirtha's saying, to have a lot of control over how their information is used and shared. We talk in the report about basically getting to kind of digital birth certificates and things like that so that I don't have to prove that I have school-age kids because the Department of Education already knows that, and I was born in New York City, so the city also owns my birth certificate, and all of that should be seamless. But as you point out, delivering that is difficult. Can you walk us through a little bit, like what are the resources it takes to build something like this? How long does it take? How do you do the user testing and the user-centered design? Maybe give us a sense, because
Yep.
some of our audience knows how to build technology, but not everybody does.
Okay, so a couple of things. And first, the non-tech. A key issue to decide is this a priority, given everything has limited resources, limited attention capacity. When the city identifies a priority and marshals all of its capabilities, it can do great things fast, pre-K for all, vaccinating, people might have their quibbles, but there's many millions of people vaccinated. There's big things the city can do. It's also true that there's more things that we should be doing than we can do. So I bring that back to the digital wallet because there's no question it would be a good thing if it existed. One of the reasons I think it's worth doing a small pilot in the beginning is to understand, is it worth doing more than some other thing we could be doing with tech to improve the lives of low-income New Yorkers? Is there a different product that, maybe in some other review that that ought to, gives more bang for the buck kind of thing? And that's a decision that happens every day, all the time, as you well know. And I say that to underscore the importance of the user research, and user research, not just which button do you like better, but the user research that we actually listen to the voices of the people that we're intending to serve. What is the most priority to them? What affects their lives? What would be most helpful for them to achieve what they want to achieve? And so that ethos, baking that into the technology process and the choice making on technology, but on any policy, I think, we've seen that expand and grow, and so that's a key piece. And that also, by the way, takes time and gets sacrificed when things are in crisis and you have to move fast. So there's always trade-offs, but that's number one. On these issues, you have to, some things the city's in total control of. But one thing I think that sometimes happens among technologists is, well, why doesn't the city just do X? There's probably people who've thought about that before, and there's reasons why, and it's not just because no one knows what they're doing. It's some of the data sources that one would need are controlled by state systems or by federal requirements, which prohibit the sharing of a particular data that was collected for a particular purpose. Some of the systems are actually not owned by the city. The actual technology is managed by the state. And the state has to issue waivers. One of the reasons why HRA didn't allow you to use their app for cash is because for a long time the state prohibited it. One of the great silver linings of COVID, with all the bad, is that it exposed more people to the indignities and challenges of having to interact with public systems, and that's lifted up the priority to make public systems better digitally for everybody, including folks whose voices are not always listened to. So I'm digressing, but things that are tough are procurement. Things have to be competitively bid. That process goes through, many months of review. Sometimes there's political squabbles about whether or not contracts are going to be let out. There are some challenges around risk management, so people are concerned about doing things like beta, and prototypes and testing and seeing what works and letting things fail in public. Something doesn't go right in public, that's going to be in the paper. So there's all kinds of constraints. Again, not excuses. We need to make things better, and I'm always excited about, because there's always plenty of opportunities to make things better.
And just to build on this, I mean, one thing I'm hearing loud and clear, and for all of us very much to remember, is that, number one, I'm hearing, probably it's true with any technology product, that the actual coding is a relatively small portion of the work. That you talked about, the user-centered design takes a lot of time. Getting the rights and access to the information and all of that takes a lot of time, probably testing on the back end. So the coding is only one part of it. And how do you do that? Do you do the bulk of it in-house? Do you contract it out? How do you do that at Opportunity NYC?
It varies. I think when ideally we'd have more internal capacity to do more lightweight work, and sort of we've tried to pursue that vision in terms of having technologists who could build things up quickly, test them, iterate, and we do that on lighter weight projects. When things really require deep integration, system integration across different agents, different tools, systems, some 30 years old, COBOL type systems. Often we're relying on sometimes people who have that specialized skill within city government somewhere, sometimes with external vendors often. So it's a mix, but much of it is still done by external vendors. And I think, we've tried to make progress to be able to have more sophistication internally around the potential use of modern approaches, modern tools, design, so that we could be more of a collaborative partner with our external vendors. And I think we're seeing that across city government too. But I heard Noel give the pitch, if you're a technologist, you want to work on things that matter, you want to serve millions of people and solve, address the toughest problems, city government's a good place to do that.
Mirtha, can I ask you, Matt kind of threw out the provocative thing that as much as I certainly got attracted to the opportunity, the concept of the digital locker, and it resonated with you, maybe it's not the most important thing. Right, and you, thanks to some of your colleagues, I've gotten a sense of some of the challenges and shortcomings with some of the current systems that are in place. You mentioned Homebase. How would you think about the kinds of problems that exist with the current technology and where that stacks up? Is a new, do we run the risk of running at the new shiny object instead of just improving and maintaining the existing systems? Or how would you think about that as a user?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I'm gonna take you guys back to when I started working for the Homebase program, which was a long time ago, 2007. And at that time, we would interface with HRA, and HRA, we've said the name 20 times, but for those that might not know, they basically manage public benefits for people living in poverty in the city of New York. That includes cash assistance, that includes food stamps, Medicaid, and the housing voucher called City FEVs that subsidizes people's housing. So we would interface with HRA because obviously our clients, we're a community-based organization. I remember our office at that point used to be on Wyckoff Avenue and Linden at the corner. People would come into our services, but they still needed services from HRA. From that time to where we're at, and technology really has been at the center of this. our relationship with HRA has changed drastically. No longer do we spend hours on end trying to contact, for example, workers at HRA. We have access to Workers Connect to have to find the birth certificate of somebody that applied for public benefits, last month. People no longer have to constantly bring in their documents to apply for services. So the city has, in my opinion, made a really huge improvement and investment on technology that has really helped the people the people doing the work, and also the people receiving the services. For me, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, really the devil's in the details. It's now that this infrastructure exists, how can we improve it? So I'm leaning more towards really improving our current technology instead of like jumping ship and saying, let's do this other thing. Because some of these things really do work most of the time. It's the times that it doesn't work that the inconvenience and the upset client and the client that says, but I already gave that paper 3 weeks ago to somebody else at another office. And we're saying, well, we can't see it, which probably means that somebody forgot or didn't have the time to upload it into the system, or something went wrong. But that specific situation is what we should focus on and try to prevent that from happening. So identifying really what is the experience of the user. To me, and you talked a little bit about like what is the level of importance and priority that this stuff has. As a Black immigrant, I tend to believe, and you do forgive me for saying this, but I tend to believe that pretty often the needs and wants of people living in marginalized communities are not taken as serious as those who are living in affluent communities. So talking to the people getting public benefits. I mentioned earlier, my mother gets public benefits, but I don't get public benefits. So I am detached I have one person that I'm connected to that receives public benefits. She will probably be better at speaking at what needs to happen for her needs to be covered. And she's an older adult, but then there's other people who are families with children that are interacting with the city, with public schools, as you mentioned earlier, with public benefits. Is really speaking with the people that are receiving the services and saying, these are the products that exist right now. How can we push these products to do what you need, to eliminate or at a minimum decrease all the inconveniences that really technology should do? So from my perspective, we've made some great strides. Let's refine them. Let's get the users in the room. Let's continue to test and continue to push the idea that technology can't resolve a lot of the inconveniences that poor people who are, for the most part, minorities in this city or immigrants are experiencing when interfacing a system that is supposed to help them in their moment of need.
Thanks, Mirtha. Can I, to Matt, and I'd love to get a sense from somebody who's done great work inside the city about when things go wrong. Like, how should we as New Yorkers and as people who are interested in the delivery of urban technology, how should we understand the shortcomings? Mm-hmm. Right, and I've been in your shoes. I've had to answer for city government for everything that I had nothing control over. So I don't mean this as an attack, but like, how do we understand when there are clear gaps in understanding the user's needs, in things like the person didn't upload it, so maybe it's training on the city side, or maybe it's something about the design of the software, or something about the systems. How should we think about that?
Well, great question, and. Let me get to it, but let me not let the moment pass, because I think we're saying the same thing. And this is not controversial statement, like listen to your users, like customer experience. Like these are things that the best companies do, and they build a capability at, and that's what, you know, drives priorities and choices. And like you're saying, it's not just getting a group together and say, what should we do? It's not it's a discipline, a service design discipline and methodology and commitment that can be consistent with procurement and consistent with other things that, you know, we're talking about technology, but that's a piece to underscore, because that drives what gets built, how it gets built, what problems may result, all of the things that Mirtha is talking about, and they will be different depending on, you know, languages spoken. Certain languages have to, you know, go backwards on the screen. There's, it will differ depending on, you know, whatever the personal circumstances or challenges are. So just saying, you know, we've invested a lot of that in our unit. We have a service design studio specifically designated to do that kind of work, whether it's a technology product or a non-technology work. So basic point, but part of it is pressing that point continuously. So what could go wrong? I mean, it could be a million things that go wrong. I mean, it could be legacy systems are just broken. They need to get fixed for that day it went down. It could be it could be any range of things. It could be that the databases are intentionally siloed because of the privacy restrictions. One of the great things, and I think this is another real opportunity, is it could be like just the linkages between data. Not every entity collects, you know, social security numbers has, right? Identifier numbers. People mistype things. People get married, divorce, change custody of their kids. So the things can move around, and the data linkage might not call up the person in one database to another database. One of the things that, again, a product that we're proud to talk about is like a master data management tool. And this gets to tech strategy for the city going forward. Like, I think there's sometimes a mental model for folks who want to solve a problem, aren't necessarily technologists, that says everyone should use the same system. Then it'll be easy and everything will work together. That doesn't work. The city's too big. There's too many different things. Once you say everyone use the same thing, you can't actually accommodate for the various differences and specifics that govern how things actually work. But then we also don't want everyone to just build the same thing in their own different silos. So one of the things we're trying to evolve to is, you know, modular tools that are focus on interoperability. So things like record linkages across different tools, something we have for a particular tool, we platform it so that any agency can use it. It gets into the and what do you need to do that kind of approach? It has to be a priority. You have to bring agency heads, law department, technologists, city hall folks to be focusing on that, because it requires input from multiple disciplines across many different perspectives.
And as I know full well from my own experience, anything interagency takes a lot more work than anything within an agency, and that's what you're talking about.
And it's particularly important in situations where we're talking about the needs of low-income New Yorkers. Like, poverty is complex. There's lots of challenges that are associated with poverty. Solutions have to be multifaceted. It's not one-shot things that might be governed by a particular agency. So thinking about how do we translate an organization that's organized by department into one that's like can be holistic, and we're meeting the needs of the individual and their multifaceted needs. Data and technology are perfectly suited to facilitate that kind of work. But again, it's more than the coding.
Indeed, thanks. So we've got time for a couple of questions. I'll take one on Zoom that came out online first, which is a user saying, I'd like to see the digital locker supporting alternative ways to build credit as opposed to FICO scores. Any work along these lines? And maybe, Mirtha, let me ask you first, kind of the idea of building credit, how important is that to the people you serve?
It's incredibly important. I've had multiple conversations actually in the last year around how do we help low-income New Yorkers, poor people living in poverty, build credit. And we actually, RiseBoro started actually working with an organization called Isuzu that when you're renting an apartment, you're not building credit. People, when you own your house, you have that means probably you have a mortgage unless you're rich, and that means your credit was, you had credit and it was good enough to get a mortgage. But when you're renting, which is the case for almost every poor New Yorker, you're paying your rent on time, and that doesn't mean anything to your credit score. So through a partnership with actually a tech company built by two great guys, we are through our housing, we're connecting our tenants and their on-time rental payments, and they are reporting it to the credit bureau. So that means people are actually building credit through rental payments, which years ago it was something that we would talk about it. We would say, wouldn't it be great if somebody could build credit through this way? But these are just in kind of like tech solving a problem that has always existed. So yes, our clients need access, all possible access to build credit.
Interesting, thanks. Matt, anything going on along those lines?
Well, I'd flag our Office of Financial Empowerment that works with people around all kinds of financial issues. I don't know if they're doing the kind of partnership that you're describing. I mean, I think it's incredible that a community-based organization that's routed in, like, working closely with folks, has the trusted relationships, can then blend the financial technology capabilities. Like, that is an impressive partnership. So kudos.
That's great. Thank you. Let's so Jerry's got our first in-person question here.
Thanks. A great discussion, and making change in organizations we all know is pretty hard. Two things. One is Helsinki had a mission to be the most functional city. Secondly, they created a sort of approach which was saving 1 hour a day of wasted time, which I thought had a lot of magic in it, because it took you down to the street to say, what do you, as your mother, want to do that gets an hour of wasted time out of her life? It could be waiting for a bus, it could be waiting in a line. It just seems to me it's just a perspective to how do we give people back time to use to take care of their kids, to have fun, whatever. The second thing is we did a study of 12 agencies change in the Bloomberg administration, wrote a book about it called Smarter New York City, which I think would be helpful in your sort of picturing how to get change. And we found 2 or 3 things were the case. You had to have a leader in an agency. It would not just pop up. Then you had to have a staff that could do it, obviously. The third one, though, we found was important, was incentives to keep the agency from losing money, but actually gaining money in some fashion, budgetary money. So that the book is a nice look at that, Smarter New York City. And I think it would save, it'd be helpful for this new administration to use it as a guide for where they're headed. That was not a question, that was a comment.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. But the first one, any thoughts on the idea of how the people you serve could best be helped to save time out of their day? I've this like internal joke that now all of you guys, only you guys are gonna know. That it's being poor in New York is a waste of time. And it's the time you spend waiting for the bus, and if you have the finances, if you get somewhere, if you don't have a car, if you have the finances and you need to get somewhere quickly, you'll take an Uber, you'll have a driver maybe. The time that you spend, for example, just as we've spoken, filling out applications, and in many situations, even though the technology might be there, people, there's still the changing the mindset of you don't have to drop into a community-based organization to receive services. That COVID actually, as a silver lining, has
has actually helped us in saving some time. But there are multiple ways in which really living in poverty in this city means that you need additional time, an additional few hours beyond the 24 hours that somebody that is affluent. So when you were stating this, in my mind, I was like, this is a really great way of seeing how to address poverty, because there is time wasted dealing with the multiple situations that could happen for a poor person.
That resonates also, as we were talking about in the previous panels, some of the things around deliveries and whatever. You know, it's great that I don't have to go to the grocery store if I choose to get my groceries delivered, but frankly, I could be on a phone call doing my groceries and I'm still like earning my keep here at Cornell Tech, right? But if you work an hourly job, that's money out of your pocket when you're standing in line at the grocery store. Matt, any thoughts from Opportunity NYC around time savings and time poverty?
I mean, I think Mirtha said it well.
All right, excellent. I think we've got one more question that we'll take from the audience.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And this whole time I was curious, you mentioned that, the problem is usually the execution and not really coming up with these ideas. And so I was wondering, where can we draw inspiration from in the world regarding this concept of digital lockers? Are there other governments or organizations out there that are doing similar things and, maybe farther along?
They're definitely, I'm sure.
The answer to that is always Estonia, right?
Yeah, Estonia. You can always say Estonia. In the U.S., one of the ways that we developed the prototype was with an open source approach so that other cities could do it as well, and there was interest, and I know Baltimore has been interested. I think it speaks to trying to be deliberate, because I think they rolled it out, but now have to do a relaunch. But anyway, there's a lot of interest. I think San Diego also, or there's a West Coast city, much smaller scale than New York City, fewer legacy systems to engage with, that has the tool. So there's definitely, I mean, this is a common thing in civic tech too. Well, such and such city does it. Why don't you just use their code in here? And I think there's something to that, but not often as much as one would think, because there's a different context, there's different existing interoperability challenges. But I know cities are getting better about sharing what's working.
All right, excellent. I'm going to wrap up. I have one rapid fire question that I want to give each of you, because the whole idea here was to give advice to the next administration, and thinking about that broadly. It's the mayor, but also the city council and other electeds. You're no doubt writing a transition memo, so can you give us a sneak peek into what it might be?
Well, look, I'd say broadly is this. I think changes in administration are always healthy. You have folks who have been unburdened by the need to implement, who've been able to have ideas, but also more seriously, like when you're inside city government, you can be very internally focused because it's so hard to move things through an existing bureaucracy. When you're external, you can be more attuned to best practice, what's the latest, where are good examples. And so I think having a new administration that's coming in with that, it's always good. The thing I would say to complement that is there's great ideas and thoughts and talent in the existing city staff who are not going to leave, who've thought about a lot of these same challenges over the years, have seen the same ideas come and mistakes try. So it's key to draw on the thinking that has already existed and not assume that nobody's had similar ideas previously, and also build and complement on the existing infrastructure that's in place and working. So tons of room for doing things better, more, et cetera, but don't discount what's already there.
Excellent. Mirtha, what would your advice to the next mayor and city council on technology be?
I think a lot of it was said in the last panel. I think we need infrastructure, and I really do hope that the next administration sees tech and access to tech from a racial equity perspective, from an equity perspective in general, and that just as a very quick example, prior to the pandemic, all kids between, I don't know, K to 12th grade would go to school every day. We all thought that this is how life was supposed to function, and then the pandemic hit. In the middle of March, we went to lockdown, and what happened was that there were thousands of children living in New York City shelter who did not have access to the internet. Since then, this has been resolved, and now families with children living in shelter have access to internet. But really, and by the way, the pandemic didn't happen 100 years ago or 10 years ago. This was last year. So that means that last year, there were people living in New York City shelters who did not have access to the internet. So when we're thinking about technology and about solving things through tech, we have to really look at this from an equity perspective. How can we make sure that everyone has access to the infrastructure, to technology, to Wi-Fi, to the devices that they need that was mentioned earlier, the devices that they need to go to school and to go to work and to grow and prosper, because this isn't this New York City after all. This is what we're all here.
Excellent. Well, look, I want to thank you, Matt and Mirtha. Thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. This was really great. Appreciate your time and all of your help in our project. I want to thank you all, both here in person and online, for sticking with us this morning. A couple of quick things. We're going to break for lunch. Lunch is out here for those of you who are here on Roosevelt Island. We're going to return at 1 o'clock with another great panel on privacy, featuring, among others, the Borough President of Manhattan, Gail Brewer. And I also want to point out, for those of you who are here in person at Roosevelt Island, that after our afternoon is over, as an incentive to stick with us the whole day, there's going to be a reception at the end to celebrate this great conference. So thank you again to Matt and Mirtha. Thank you all, and we'll see you at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.